Ladies and gentlemen, konnichiwa, and welcome to the Kamen Review, where we delve into a piece of media and examine the good, the okay, and the potential in order to showcase why the subject matter in question is worth investing time into, especially if it's a new subject for you wonderful people watching this. I am, of course, Guy the Kamen Gentleman. And before we delve into the subject matter that has honestly dogged me for the past 3 months, a quick point I kind of want to raise, because one of the things about writing these reviews and the way I've sort of been approaching it has been very difficult, I will admit. And I realized the way I'm writing it and the way I'm thinking about it is that of a newcomer to a franchise. And I thought, okay, that's actually probably the best way, especially for like today's subject matter, especially. Looking at it from a newcomer is probably the best way to do it. So this review and all future reviews will be approaching the subjects from that standpoint and that mentality, because it works a lot better, and I feel less silly writing about the way the franchise or the subject work. So please do keep that in mind going forward. So today's review that has lasted, like I said, about 3 months, writing it and rewriting it and starting again and getting frustrated and stopping and starting and just going blah, is the absolutely fantastic Elden Ring. The first open world entry into the Souls franchise from Software. That's a hard sentence to say, having from and from Software right next to each other. Released back in 2022, specifically February 25th on PC and consoles. And honestly, this is why I have that mentality of a newcomer, because while I have played Dark Souls, Demon Souls and stuff like that, I have never really gotten into the Souls franchise like properly. And Elden Ring, with its open world, its world built by writers like George R. R. Martin, and the wonderful style of the game really caught me. And seeing the trailer and seeing the fights in the game, I was blown away already, and it was like, okay, I want to play this. And then when I got it, I was like, oh my god, it's more than I imagined it could be. And that's really, really cool. And of course, given my noobness to Souls games, I was overwhelmed and concerned, and that goes my phone decided to be annoying in the middle of a review. I apologize. But I was very concerned about picking it up, because I am not the best gamer in the world. I do like a lot of chill games and games where I can just focus on one particular thing, like building. So I was like, oh, I'm going to play this and I'm going to probably hate it. I'm going to have the same experience that I did with Dark Souls, and where it's like, oh, this is really fun, and then I just lost interest. However, what I saw, and when I picked it up and actually got to play it, and I played it on Steam even, not Steam. I played it on Steam, but also on stream, which again is a weird thing to fucking say. I honestly was hooked. And with the expansive 14 regions of the game and rich detail of biomes, and what I didn't know at the time, but the lore-heavy locations definitely kept dragging me back and keeping me invested in the game, where the Souls content would be sort of going, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm terrible at this game, but I kept wanting to explore and kept doing that. And one of the original concerns, beyond, is it going to be the same as previous Souls games, was the difficulty curve, because I've played open world games where the starting areas, like in MMOs, sentences, guy, come on. In MMOs, World of Warcraft, fuck it. I'll say that. It just sounds weird. I'm saying like the way I'm saying it, and it doesn't sound right to me. So like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, uh, Elder Scrolls Online, Anarchy Online, and that's going back a while. uh, those those starting areas of an open world, the enemies are very weak and they stay weak. And when you get to higher areas, it's like impossibly hard, no matter how strong you are. And if you go back, and it's very easy at a high level. But thankfully, Elden Ring has definitely changed that for me, because even the starting areas can be difficult, especially if you make a mistake. And again, that is very much a Souls concept of you mess up once, you're going to get hurt by it, which is very, very fun. And I've put about 300 hours into this game. Let me actually double check live on the video. I've put about 323 hours, 24 hours into Elden Ring at the time of recording. And one thing I didn't really anticipate when I was playing it was its main theme. And I think a lot of people probably don't see this, but it's a game about self-improvement. And like I said, most people will be like, what? It's about killing things and leveling up and killing more things and leveling up more and getting better loot and doing that. And yeah, I can see that. But Elden Ring definitely has this air of self-improvement about it, because nothing in the game is unbeatable. One of the key things is like you will manage to do this. And a wonderful thing about Souls games and just gaming in general is the ability to sort of master games like this and be able to fight bosses or normal enemies and not get hit by them. And that's really, really cool, because I have seen that in me from all the content that I've gone through in this game. And I've finished this game. It took me like, again, 300 hours to do it, but I did it. And just before I recorded this, I'm like 3 achievements away from finishing the entire thing, and that's rare for me to do. So the reason why I say like it's self-improvement is right down to the fact that I question a lot of my abilities during this game. And that sounds weird to think, but it's like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Whenever I'm in a fight that I'm struggling with, aka Melina, Malina, or whatever, however you pronounce her name. But like fights like hers, where it's like, what am I doing wrong? How should I do this? How should I approach this? How do I do this thing? And it's not a stressful thing. Well, it is stressful, but it's not like rage-inducing, I'm going to snap my controller in half sort of mentality. It's more the, okay, how do I get better? What do I need to do? Do I need to change things? Do I need to move a little bit differently? Do I need to not lock on? And again, the more I've tried that boss fight, the better I've got at it. And once I realized the build and the style that I'm using right now was actually useful, I'm like, okay, I can do this now. So the fact that I've gotten better and I've changed how I think about games and how I approach them is very, very cool. And it actually works beyond Elden Ring as well. Like a lot of the times in adventure games, I don't really block that much, but because of the way that Elden Ring and Souls sort of work, my brain has gone, okay, I need to be more defensive in this case. I can't hit my face against the brick wall of the game expecting to get through it, like simply from just doing that. And that's not to say you can't just brute force your way through games, and there are people out there who do that, and with bad results, I suppose. But having the ability to identify those issues and change it and approach a lot of games nowadays with a little bit more of a tactical touch, all because of Elden Ring, is remarkable to me, because I'm getting on in years. I'm getting to the point where I'm probably not going to be able to play games that much anymore. But also, it is a wonderful thing about, like, no matter how old you get, you can learn to adapt and grow in your skills. And that's really, really cool. And I kind of want to talk about combat a lot when we actually get into the meat of the review. But needless to say, Elden Ring has definitely changed me as a gamer. And I hope through the good and the okay sections of this review that you get to see that has changed me, that these aspects of the game have changed me. My understanding has changed me. And I really think that you will enjoy that. So let's get into the good, shall we? The world of Elden Ring is one of beauty and danger that ensnares the player right from the start. Through a combination of expansive biomes, finely crafted locations and architecture, engaging combat mechanics, and deep and intriguing lore. Much like other Souls games, the story of Elden Ring exists on 3 different levels. The main one that most players will at some point experience is the narrative level. This style is presented through conversations with numerous NPCs and boss monsters that you come across in the world of Elden Ring, as well as specific cutscenes found in parts of the storyline. Yet it is possible to go through the entire game with very little interaction with this level of storytelling, and this is by no means a shot at the numerous aspects of the overarching storyline that fills the main quest, along with the numerous side quests found within the game. The second main method of storytelling found within the Lands Between is the visual level, and honestly, from a personal point of view, this is perhaps the best aspect about the world of Elden Ring in terms of its storytelling, as its delivery manages to impact the player without them ever actually noticing it. Through specific placement of locations, objects, or even enemies in the world around the player helps them not only learn about what has gone on in the Lands Between prior to their arrival, but also how the world continues to turn on a day-to-day level. A good example can be found within the opening biome of Limgrave, due to the fact that numerous relics and ruins are found across this region, and they're a little bit more obvious than other regions in the game, as well as a mini-boss found within one of the first caves that you will actually go into. This mini-boss is known as the Beastman of Far Missoula, as from both a name and a visual front, this boss is entirely different from anything you come across within the opening region. It allows the player to ask questions about what it is, what is Far Missoula, and why is there a Beastman here. From that interaction alone and without the dialogue, the game manages to highlight a unique creature type as well as a region that is not currently accessible to the player. And through future parts of the game and the progression of the main storyline, the player will reach the Far Missoula region, now known as Crumbling Far Missoula. And there you will connect dots that not only the Beastmen live there, but also the ruins that you come across within the Lands Between are actually from this region. Another good example, this one however I did not notice actively during my own playthrough, and this was brought up on Twitter of all places, is the locations in the opening region. The moment you step into Limgrave after going through the tutorial or just skipping that tutorial area, you are greeted with a sight to behold. And on the landscape around the player, you will actually notice certain key areas that will actually come important later on in the game, which is a wonderful way to highlight these regions and these locations for the player to be curious about and hopefully come across later on. The third main method of storytelling within Elden Ring is something that is probably referred to as flavor text, and this style is mainly contained within the descriptions of items, armor, and weapons found within the game. These are designed to give the player glimpses into the history of the Lands Between and its many items connecting to the many diverse characters. This, if you are like me, someone who loves lore, is a wonderful addition, especially with how rich that lore actually is. A number of key elements that come into play with the storytelling always falls down to really the NPCs, because you question a lot of things, and a number of the storytelling aspects that, for example, a character known as Kale would have were sadly removed from the current game, and with hope will appear in the DLC, which I'm really looking forward to from what we've been able to see from data mining and people putting together videos of that. The story of Kale is really, really cool and very moving. One of my favorite examples, however, of storytelling in Elden Ring has to come along with the Beast Clergyman boss fight in Far Missoula, mainly because of his opening line. If you have no interest in the storyline and learning about the history of the world, it's still a really cool opening line of the Beast Clergyman running towards you and more or less saying, "Thou who approachest destined death, I will not have it stolen from me again." And it's a wonderful line, and it really highlights what this character is, and there's a few things related to that character that actually show up throughout the game, and it's really, really cool. These elements of storytelling work wonderfully on their own, but also together. And it definitely creates a blanket of immersion that definitely keeps you engaged and motivated to explore and learn more whenever you are interested in that. However, even with a richly crafted world, this is still at its core a Souls game. As such, it requires an equally crafted combat system, and From Software being who they are, this was really just obvious was going to be a thing. The open nature of character creation and the classes found within Elden Ring allow the player to finely tune what their character will excel at throughout the course of the game through the use of pre-made builds or hybrid builds, something that I actually really do enjoy. And before we get into what those builds entail, nothing can be achieved first without choosing a class for your character, or Tarnished, as the game refers to your avatar. When you first enter Elden Ring, you are tasked with creating your character by the game presenting 10 different classes to choose from, all with preset attributes and gear. These classes, while mostly visual in terms of what they can actually do have some strengths and weaknesses, and these classes are Hero, Bandit, Astrologer, Warrior, Prisoner, Confessor, Wretch, Vagabond, Prophet, and Samurai. Which class you pick will determine those strengths and weaknesses. For example, the Samurai class, which is one that I frequently use, has a very strong opening ability, being able to poise break enemies by really hitting them very hard with their weapon, the Uchikatana, and its Ash of War or ability, Unsheath. But the baseline stats that also come with the Samurai can be a tricky thing to manage, because later on in the game, when you gain access to the ability to respec your character, your attribute levels will go down to those preset numbers. However, if you choose the Wretch as a starting class, you actually get a perfectly leveled stat line at the beginning of the game, meaning that when you actually come to the respec moment, you are spending less to actually level on that, which is very, very useful to have and really good for messing around with different builds. When gaining experience in Elden Ring, there is an unspoken rule that is ingrained in most Souls players, rookie, veterans, or legacy players alike, and that is never bite off more than you can handle, because, as is the staple of Souls games, experience can easily be gained or lost depending on how focused you are when playing. All enemies in Elden Ring grant different values of experience in the form of runes, with mobs granting a low amount to bosses dropping 1,000 or more upon death. Also scattered around the regions are items called golden runes. These are consumable items that grant a set amount depending on the value next to the golden rune item name. A good example of this is a golden rune 1 or golden rune 9. However, if indeed you did bite off more than you can handle, fret not! Your collection of runes is still there when you die. However, they rest either where you fell or close by. But this is much like every other Souls game. It isn't as easy as it sounds, especially if you fall in a boss fight, as often said runes will remain within the boss area, with the exception of mini-bosses found outside of legacy dungeons. These are found in jails or ever goals, depending on your pronunciation, as your runes will be there where you died, but you won't have to re-enter the ever jail to recover them, unlike normal boss fights. Beyond the gameplay loop of kill enemy, get experience, level, get new gear, repeat, rune farming is often a great tactic to use, especially when you manage to unlock certain locations in the lands between. For example, one in Caelid, very close to the Beast Clergyman NPC, and can, with the correct items and equipment, boost your levels dramatically by giving you a lot more runes than you would normally get, especially within the span of a few minutes. This aspect of Elden Ring is something that I've been looking into quite a lot because I'm very interested in how other people go about it. However, here on YouTube, my personal recommendation page is often littered with the good and the bad of rune farming suggestions. So if you are ever interested in learning about these things, please do take a lot of it with a pinch of salt. Leveling up in Elden Ring focuses the player allocating points into different attributes. These attributes determine many of your stats going forward, and the attributes are vigor, mind, endurance, strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, and arcane. The freedom found in the leveling system of a Souls game is incredibly rewarding for the player's creativity to play exactly how they want. And like I said, there are lots and lots of builds out there on YouTube and on Wikipedia. It all falls down to how you want to play, and finding something that is enjoyable and works all the time for you is definitely a momentous moment. I myself have found my own special builds. Vigor, mind, and endurance determine your survivability in the game, because vigor and mind focus on your health and mana, while endurance focuses on your stamina and carry weight. But depending on what playstyle or build that you are interested in playing, you really need to focus your attribute points into specific areas. For example, if you want to be a melee wielding knight or tank, you kind of want to put a lot of points into vigor and also strength. But for those who are not interested in wielding giant hammers and colossal weapons, who want to be a little bit more nimble and slashing with blades and dodging very quickly, you want to focus on endurance and dexterity. However, if melee combat is not your thing and you don't really want to use bows, there is another option in the form of magic. To use magic, intelligence, faith, and arcane stats are key for this thing, along with mind, of course. The vast arsenal of spells found within Elden Ring fall into two different categories, both with their own strengths and weaknesses. These categories are sorcery and incantation. In order to effectively use sorcery magic, for example, there are two key requirements: a high enough intelligence stat along with wielding a staff weapon. Once these two parameters are met, then you'll be able to master the vast selection of sorcery magic, which takes the form primarily of glintstone magic. These spells often take the form of ranged and homing magic, to beams of energy, to conjuring weapons, allowing you to be a magic melee character, which is kind of fun to do, I will admit, as well as some fire magic and, surprisingly, gravity magic, which is a lot of fun, pulling enemies in, summoning meteors, and all that fun jazz. However, incantations, while like sorcery having two requirements, this requires you to focus on the faith stat, as well as equipping a sacred seal. Incantations are more versatile than sorceries in my opinion, as the spell list found within this category often focuses on buffing magic like Flame Grant Me Strength, Howl of Shabdidi, and Golden Vow, to name a few. These allow you to buff up your character's stats for a temporary minute or two, and it's very, very useful in boss fights, as well as applying special effects to your weapons, coating them with fire, with lightning, with holy, with blood flame, which is kind of dope, and black flame stuff as well as also using blood magic, and you get to use dragon magic, which is really fun, and one of the really cool boss fights in the game is fighting dragons and getting their hearts and getting their spells, their abilities, and it's a lot of fun. Weapon damage tends to fall into two major categories, with a small third part attached to it, like a extension that was hastily built on a house, and these categories have sub-effects depending on what is used. The categories are physical and elemental. With physical, you get your standard damage, your strike damage, your slash, your pierce, with each type being effective and ineffective against different enemies. For example, strike damage is often effective against rocky or brittle enemies and ineffective against scaly creatures like dragons. Elemental damage covers magic damage, fire damage, lightning damage, and holy damage, with these following the same rules as physical. The third tacked on extension group mainly covers specific rule sets within the game, with animation critical moments like backstab attacks, having specific weak points, or taking extra damage from specific spells or weapons. Now, all of these things so far, I've more or less covered the strengths. Their weaknesses fall into specific areas. So with magic, it's the cast time. This really cool spell that you're going to use might take 5 seconds to cast, and in those 5 seconds you could be killed very easily. So it's often about balancing what you are using with what you want to do, and being aware of enemy placements. If you're sneaking up to an enemy, you want to be quiet because they'll turn around if they hear you, unless you have some buff like I'm trying to think of an example. There is the Black Knife set. For example, if you're wearing the armor, you're going to be silent. If you're using the sneaky ability from an Ash of War, which my brain is literally forgetting what it's called, and I normally use it, the enemies are not really going to see you. So you have to balance a lot of what you want to do with what you really should be doing to be safe about this. Along with the damage types, however, a number of weapons, ammo, consumables, spells come with status effects. Now, these are specific debuffs that, when applied enough, trigger a specific outcome. So when they show up in the game, you'll see a bar next to the icon show up on your screen, and that will fill up. When it's filled up, the effect will trigger. For some of these, they will stay on, or it'll be a one-time thing, and it will reset back to 0. These status effects are poison, which is a damage over time once triggered like every other game. Deadly poison, which does more damage to you. Scarlet rot, which acts the same as poison and deadly poison, but is a lot more dangerous in terms of how much health you're going to lose, because this takes out chunks of your health very quickly. Especially if you're fighting Malenia, you will know exactly what I'm on about here. Blood loss, which is an instant damage based upon the enemy's or your max hit points. Frostbite, which inflicts damage and slows down stamina regeneration, as well as affecting a few other things. You can actually deal with this by using fire on yourself, like burning yourself or burning the enemy to get rid of the frostbite proc and then do it again. Sleep, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It puts things to sleep. Very good against certain bosses. Madness, which is probably my most hated status effect, which stuns the target and deals health and mana damage, which is really annoying, especially when it's put on you. And Deathblight, which is probably the most dangerous of them all, because once it fills, you're dead. There is no stopping it. There is no spell that gets rid of it, but there is like consumables that you can get, but it's very difficult to get them. And like I said, these status effects, while you can use them, are going to be used against you quite a lot. Deathblight used by basilisks, for example, and they're nasty to deal with, but there are a few ways to get rid of them, which is very, very useful. All of these aspects that make up the majority of combat found within Elden Ring are the main reason why this game has changed the way I approach gaming as a whole. Before Elden Ring, I wouldn't really consider the different status elements or the rock, scissor, paper method of being aware of type advantage and using said advantages and abilities to tip the scales in my favor instead of the enemy. And the earlier mention of the freedom throughout Elden Ring also allows for those advantages to change up, resulting in an equally ever-changing battlefield, as the builds you approach fights with might not entirely work. They will still work, but they won't be as effective as they had in a previous boss fight. And so many times now, I find myself taking more time when moving towards an objective or location or even a boss fight, both in Elden Ring and in other games. And I often approach these crucial moments in video games with a bit more attention, making sure that what I have equipped is correct, that I have enough consumables and the right buffs and healing. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest selling points to the overall idea, that at its core, throughout the combat mechanics, that Elden Ring is self-improvement. That's what it's focused on. But while combat has taken up a large chunk of this review, and I apologize for that, there are a few things, one or two really, that I've intentionally left out because I want to bring that up in the OK section, because they're more of an annoyance than anything else. The last part of the good section that I kind of want to dedicate some time to is the enemies and their designs, because exploring a beautiful world with a playstyle of your own is great, and experiencing the lore. But what good is all that and the fancy sword that you have without monsters to slay? And one of the really cool things about Elden Ring and its enemy types is no matter where you go in the world, you will encounter similar enemy types. Now you're probably thinking, that's not a good thing, that's a recyclable thing. Why are they doing that? Well, let's get into that, shall we? So a lot of the enemy types that you will come across are bats and rats and soldiers and grunts and giant enemy crabs with sadly no weak point for massive damage. But every single one of them in the game feels different. And they do that by changing up their abilities or their attack patterns. For example, bats can be really annoying, but you'll really only find them in caves or at night. So as long as you're aware, you're not going to come across them. And you've got siren bats and who deal poison damage and stuff like that. Again, minor stuff. Soldiers will occupy most of the lands between because you'll come across distinct versions of those soldiers. You'll have soldiers that just attack normally, ones that use magic, ones that use glintstones, ones that use perfumer bottles to spray fire at your face. So it always keeps you on your toes. However, one really annoying thing I will bring up is the rats, because they are probably the most annoying enemy type in the game. However, it's really useful to know that you can identify the differences between these enemy types because of their model change. So like if you're coming across an enemy that deals a lot of blood loss damage, they're going to have growths, reddish growths on their body. If you're coming across a deathblight crab, which do exist, their shell is going to be sickly and tinged with blue and, that sort of horrible, like, ew, this is a zombie thing kind of deal with its design. But like I said, rats. You can never be too careful with rats in this game because they have a very nasty hit string, because every time they hit you, you get stunned. Like, it's a very brief stun, but if they get lucky, they're going to hit you over and over again, especially if they're in a pack, because wolves, dogs, those types of enemies often are in packs. And it can be very easy to be overwhelmed by them so fast. Like, you can blink and you're dead, and it's like, oh my god. However, madness enemies are really annoying, especially when the madness enemies are rats. So a madness enemy will look the same apart from their eyes, which are orange in color, not to be confused with golden, which are better enemies to come across. But when you're getting the nice snackage from the rats when they're nibbling at your face, the madness ones can more or less trigger a madness proc incredibly quickly. And remember, that stuns you. So those rats are going to come in for a nice snack. They're, ooh, tarnished. Ooh, let's have him raw today. Nom, 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 nom. It's kind of annoying. Really is. As I mentioned, the golden-eyed enemies that you come across, referred to herein as golden eyes. This enemy type spawns very rarely within the game, within certain parameters being set, and while they will have no altered stats or attacks, they will drop more runes than normal upon death, making them very rewarding to kill if you manage it. However, if you are unlucky enough to fall before killing them, they will despawn. So when you come back, they're gone. They will show up again, but it's very, very, very annoying. And now, a take that maybe everyone will agree with on this one. There is one enemy type in this game that is annoying as all hell and actually is the most hated, and that is the dreaded Great Dragonfly. Now, is this a giant boss of doom? No. It's a very easy to kill enemy. And when I'm talking about their health value, they are incredibly annoying whenever you target lock them, basically. Whenever you're targeted on them, they will like to run around your face so fast that you cannot effectively shoot them with your weapons. And because of that, and their just annoyance, I know a few other people do refer to them as mosquitoes because of that annoyance factor. While every enemy type that you'll encounter will present different challenges to keep you on your toes, boss fights in the lands between will provide the highest difficulty for the player and the most rewarding feeling when you manage to win. One of the good things the game actually does when it comes to boss fights is it will train you to expect certain attacks from this boss through the enemies that you encounter beforehand. And it's a great way to go, okay, this is an ability that I can actually be aware of. A good example of that is Godric the Grafted in the beginning of the game. He has a wind attack that a number of the troops in the castle actually use. So it puts into your mind that this is an ability. specifically for this region, so the boss will have it. Most bosses in Elden Ring will be locked into specific locations set along the progression line, mainly in legacy dungeons like Stormvale Castle, Raya Lucaria Academy, and the Haligtree, to name a few. And while a large number of them will be faced in any order, some do require a touch of linear progression. For example, Godric the Grafted and Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, require the player to progress through Margit, the Fell Omen, and the Red Wolf of Radagon, respectively. Others will await the player at the end of their specific dungeon. And, as mentioned before, there are certain dungeons called Everjails that you will come across in the world outside of these legacy dungeons and caves. These can be entered whenever you want, some requiring a key, but that's relatively easy to get. Other bosses found within the world take the form of dragons, like I said earlier, dragonkin soldiers, which are giant fuck-off dudes, which are very scary to fight, and Knights Cavalry, to name a few. And having the open world as the fighting arena can be incredibly useful, as there are a number of tricks and hacks, you could say, or cheeses, I think is the more popular terminology for it, that some players have employed to help with these fights. When it comes to Everjails, I tend to use them as a checkpoint for my build to see how well I'm doing, especially with my own skills. And the bosses found within these Everjails will generally be stronger variants of enemies you will have encountered within the open world, and they will often drop equipment or a spell, making them very useful and valuable for your progression. Probably the shortest part of this review will actually be this section, because in reality there is very little that I would just class as okay, as they don't really take away from the overall gameplay experience. But having them improved would definitely add on to those great and the good things about this game. The first, controversially, would actually be the narrative. And I know what you're thinking, Guy, you already said the narrative is the good bit. What are you saying? Well, yeah, like I said, there are a number of quests within the game, and I did take time off this game for a while. And when you come back to this game and you cannot remember what you've done, like it's been like 6 months, it gets incredibly frustrating because you have to go on Wikipedia, the specific wiki for Elden Ring, look up the quests and see whereabouts these things are. And you generally have to go like run around and find out if this is where you are up to. So maybe having some sort of book or ability to like mark things on a map would be really, really cool. However, there are some very small issues as well with the narrative, and that is the hiccups that come across in the game. Specifically, and apologies if you've never played Elden Ring, this is kind of a spoiler, but the biggest one towards the end of the game is very important, requiring you to do a specific thing. However, when you trigger that event, that happens, and you are teleported into the crumbling Farmazula region, nothing has changed. Whenever you go back to the overworld itself and you experience everything, it's all the same. It's only once you complete Farmazula does anything change. And it just feels like the order is messed up slightly. Like Farmazula should be before you do this main quest trigger, more or less. And it would actually work in terms of other side quests and other interesting options available to the player in terms of the storyline. Another okay point that I wish to highlight is the flip side to the combat that I mentioned earlier, and a mechanic that I like to dub as wall bouncing, and that might actually be the official terminology. I'm not entirely sure. Again, noob at this franchise. This is where the player's weapon will often collide against the terrain, causing the attack animation to fail and you to bounce back. Now, I get it, this mechanic is a part of Souls games, and I agree with you on that, but the issue has come up that is the enemy's ability to ignore this mechanic more often than not, really. They like to just go, oh, I can now hit you through the wall. And it's like, no, I can't hit you through the wall, so you can't do the same to me. Fuck you. So it can be very frustrating, and especially when you're trying to be very careful and not fall off ledges, and they just go, I'm going to attack you through the wall. Fuck you. A few rage moments can sort of come into being at that point, I would say. And lastly, I would say this point could have fallen into the potential tag, but is saved by half of the subject matter, and that is the game's OST. Now, before I continue, I am not a skilled music critician. Critician is not even a word, a critic, really. And for the longest part of my time playing the game, I never really cared about the music. It never really grabbed me, apart from the opening menu music, music because I love that. And in retrospect, this was a mistake by me because half of the music is amazing and it really captures the emotional weight of some of the key elements in the world. Specifically, I'm talking about the boss fights here because the boss fights are amazing, especially with the music cranked up. It's like, oh yeah, this is epic as hell. But that's really it when I talk about the music, because boss fights in Elden Ring are such a small part of the game in terms of the world itself. And I say that because you can't just travel from boss to boss to boss to boss to boss. It's not like a boss rush mode. It's have a boss fight, have some downtime. And the downtime is where it lets the game down in terms of its music, because a lot of the overworld music and the dungeons and the caves and the caverns and the catacombs and all those places, the music is not that interesting. It really isn't. So it is a huge disservice to the rest of the music that the downtime music is not that interesting. So I've been fascinated by the boss music, especially ever since you hear the main menu music, which is really, really cool. So I really hope in the DLC that's actually coming out very soon, because at the time of me recording this audio, we're still waiting for the announcement to drop. That is coming up in like 2 hours for me, which is really annoying. I probably won't be watching it, but you never know. Now, moving on. But in the end, Elden Ring manages to achieve something none of the other previous Souls games have ever managed to do. Minus in that collection is Sekiro and Bloodborne. Sekiro, simply because every time I've been able to buy it, it's too expensive. And every time I can't buy it, it's on sale and taunting me, going, hey guy, you want to buy me? You want to buy me? He he he. It's like, no, out of there. You damn yokai, get out of there. And Bloodborne because, well, I don't have a console. I don't really do console gaming all that much, so Bloodborne is one of those games that is definitely kept away from me. And I've heard it's a fantastic game, and I've seen people play it. I've seen, Gino, I've seen play a lot, and we'll get to him in a minute. But yeah, I've seen a lot of footage, and I always hear the performance isn't the best on console, and I would love for it to be on PC, and we keep getting the fake pictures online and stuff. It's like, hey, look, From Software games on sale on Steam. Bloodborne. It's like, wait a minute. But the thing that this game does is it keeps drawing me back, and it also remains with me, which is an interesting situation. I almost said dichotomy, and I don't know if that's the right word for that. But it's a very interesting situation for the game because, again, Souls games never stick with me, but Elden Ring did, and it still does. Now that I've finished the game and I'm in New Game Plus on Journey 2, it's like, oh god, I am still loving playing this game, and it's really, really fun, I think, to do all that. But a lot of the times, especially during the early days of my playthrough, before I really started learning about the game, when I was fighting people like Runala and Goldfree and Morgoth the Fellowman, or is it Margit the Fellowman? I can never remember which version of that is the actual boss. I kept coming across roadblocks in these bosses. For Runala and Goldfree, it was more, what am I doing wrong? What am I struggling with here? Why can't I beat these bosses? For the Fellowman, fuck that dude. Seriously, and that guy actually made me quit this game. But that's the interesting thing. Other games along this nature, whenever I get a boss like the Fellowman that makes me just say, fuck this, I put that game out of my mind. It's gone. It's kaput. It's vanished out of my memory. And eventually I'll go back to it, but I never really thought that with Elden Ring. And I think I had 6 months where I wasn't playing it. I know if it was a while because it was one of those things that I just stopped playing on stream. And I think I stopped playing it in general for that period of time. And I was still interested in Elden Ring. And I remember watching other streamers, wonderful people like Chino, Machino, Sophie Darling, and just so many wonderful people out there who streamed Elden Ring and Souls games. And I know I'm name dropping people, even though they've got nothing to do with the video, but it's worth showing the love I have for these people, because these people kept my interest in the game. Like, that's actually probably not the best way to say that, because my interest in the game was still there, but they made it bigger, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it. Because I could see, like, my style of gameplay was, like I said very early on in this review, was like, I was stubborn quite a lot. You know, I kept hitting that barrier a lot. And, you know, I shouted at people when I streamed it. I was getting very frustrated. And one of those things I really do regret is, like, I let the game get to me. So when I watched other people play the game, and I hung out in stream chats and stuff like that, and I just got to enjoy the game, I'm like, these people are really good. How can I get good? How can I get better? And that's more or less what happened. And eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to try and beat him. I'm going to try and beat the roadblock in the way, and we're going to go for that. And that's really, really impressive for Souls game for me. Is, hey, you've gone on to get better. And again, tying it all back to that self-improvement at the beginning of the review, it's impressive how that has worked for me. And it has bled into my other games, like I had hinted at earlier. I approach things now with very different angles. I don't just go for the very simplistic, this works for me, let's do it. It's also the case of, okay, this is something that isn't working, but how can I make it work? And that's really fun. And going off watching other people play the game, there is a very interesting concept, a very interesting idea that comes to mind when we talk about watching other people play a game. And that is, why would you do that if you don't want the game spoiled? And I know some people don't really care that much, but Elden Ring, in a very bizarre way, makes the experience unique. And that's probably the coolest thing about this game. Because like I said, I watched Gino fight Fire Giant. Saw him fight the Godskin duo, Malekith, Elden Beast. All of these, like, really important, wonderful moments. And I'm like, oh, I'm spoiled now. You know, I know this character, like, how this fight goes. And then I get to that fight, and it's, the experience is still there. It's still unique to get to the Elden Beast, or to fight the Malekith fight and get to phase 2 for that bit, and watching that moment is really, really cool. And it's a rewarding experience from start to finish. And now, to wrap things up, before I go on and make this review way too long than it already probably is, a lot of factors that go into Elden Ring make it as great as a game as it is. And if there is ever room for, like, a great tag in this review series that I'm going forward with, Elden Ring would be that. You know, it is the top best of the best. especially for someone like me who's not an active Souls player. I'm not skilled enough to do this stuff, but I'm skilled enough to enjoy it and to experience it as what it is, basically. And with the DLC that's coming out, hopefully in a month or two, I'm sure we're going to get a lot more content and new experiences, and I can guarantee I will come back to this video. I will come back to this review. I will make a follow-up for the DLC when I've experienced it all and talk about how it might, if there's changes, if there's like the music, if they've improved the music, if there's better combat additions, if the boss fights are a lot more epic, I think is probably the best word I can come to mind right now. And we'll talk about that. But for now, we've done Cyberpunk, we've done Elden Ring, we've done Tales of Iron as a short, we've done Breachaway demo for, again, a stream, just cut from the stream. What's next for this series? What's next for episode 2 or 3 or whatever number I'm on at this point? Because I keep forgetting what numbers, like officially what number I'm on. We're going to step away from the AAA. And we're going to look at a indie game. One that is very much close to my heart and is an absolute wonder to play. And we're going to delve into that game, which is a world of pixels and monster collecting. In the world of Koromon. So until next time, folks, thank you so much for watching and listening. Until next time, I've been Guy. Take care of yourselves.